Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We at Improving hope your fall is off to a wonderful start. I want to thank you for attending our September 24th Improving Talk. We are so glad you're here with us today. Before we get started with our webinar, I want to inform you about a feature in the presentation that will make our session more interactive. Please make note of the question mark icon at the upper right of the presentation screen. Clicking that icon will open the question and answer feature, which allows you to send the moderator questions and comments to be delivered to our insightful presenter at the appropriate time. Speaking of insightful presenters, I am proud to present Daniel Scheifler, who's a senior consultant at Improving and a great friend of mine. Today, Daniel will be sharing a webinar titled Learning to Learn. The floor is all yours, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Shervin. Good afternoon, or perhaps good morning, or even good evening, depending upon when and where you're watching this. Thank you for joining us. As Shervin mentioned, my name is Daniel Scheifler, and I'm pleased to share with you Learning to Learn. But first, I'd like to know or help share you guys where we're going. Starting off, I'm going to talk about this learning thing and go over, honestly, some definitions, so we're all talking the same language. From there, I want to help you recall some of your early education, especially the formalized school days, because you'll find a lot of that content and a lot of those memories will help guide the discussion we're going to have. And so from those memories, I want to draw out a couple of observations for you that will allow us then finally to build some practical applications for this learning to learn. Now, as I mentioned, my name is Daniel Scheifler, and in order of importance, I'm a Christian, a husband, a father, and most recently an improver. It's my very good pleasure to share this with you out of the best that I can offer, both as an improver as well as a Christian. It has been my great pleasure to take the following quote in with me every time I go join a client, to see with eyes unclouded, to see what is truly there, to think about it in slightly a different mechanism, and see if I can draw out some of the pieces which, by looking at it dead on, we miss. And so I would like for you to draw your attention to the upper left of your screen. In the presentation, you will see this little ribbon. What do you think? When you see that, it is an encouragement for you to now drop your thoughts for the answers to any questions on the slide into our chat bar, and we'll actually be able to have something like a conversation, of course, facilitated by Shervin. So without further ado, let's get this going. Learning. Quite literally borrowing from the Merriam-Webster dictionary, learning is 1, the act or experience of one who learns. That it would be stated like a computer program, which makes learning fun. Number 2, learning or a learning is a knowledge or skill acquired by instruction or study. Persons of good education and considerable learning in that context. And then lastly, learning may be qualified as the modification of a behavioral tendency by experience, such as exposure to conditioning. This would be something along the lines of Pavlov's dog, where you ring the bell and the dog begins to salivate, expecting to be fed. For our purposes, I want also to explore the core word learn. Now, what does it mean to learn? The verb form in this case, to gain knowledge or understanding, or even a skill in something by study and or experience. Are you noticing a pattern yet? To learn could be to become to be able to. I learned to dance. Or to learn could be the more introspective, reflective kind. I came to realize. I learned that honesty paid, as an example. Or lastly, we could deal with it purely in the sense of facts or data. I came to know. I was shocked to learn that she was ill. Now, for our purposes, the learning and the to learn that I want to focus on is especially on the knowledge and skills, or the to come to be able to. This introspection piece, the come to realize piece, is worthy of its own study, but honestly, we don't have that kind of time, so I'll have to come back for it later. And I would encourage you to go take a look at it yourself. But today, we'll be focusing on gaining new skills or changes in behavioral tendencies through experience. Which, of course, means I need to tackle one thing dead on. A lot of people believe or fall into deception, or the deceptively negative narrative, that learning is difficult. Let's be frank, there are a bunch of reports online that learning online didn't work for our school children when COVID came through. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And so frankly, yes, that's true. Online learning did have a lot of trouble. Working parents have limited free time to study. Very true. If you look at any commercials for, say, University of Phoenix, or even others, they'll pitch that working mom can spend hours earning a degree program that ups her job. And there's a lot of value in that narrative, but still, we have only so much time. And then lastly, of course, those courses in and of themselves are expensive, either in time because I have to go spend the time going to a boot camp and not working, or in terms of money where I have to go pay a university professor to lecture to me. And so all of these mount up and can very easily push us into that realm of maybe I don't want to do this thing. So I want to put an idea in your head, and I'm going to borrow from an author that I'm quite fond of, one Frank Herbert, in a book he wrote called Dune. And it goes like this. Muad'Dib learned rapidly because his first training was in how to learn. And the first lesson of all was the most basic trust that he could learn. It's shocking to find out how many people believe that they cannot, and more so, that they believe learning to be difficult. Muad'Dib knew that every experience will bear its lesson. And so with that in mind, I want to turn now to schooling. After all of us managed, for the most part, to come through the formal education system, and honestly, learning felt easier then. Maybe it was because we were kids, or I don't know, maybe because we actually had the time to sit down and not worry about paying the bills at the same time. But matter of fact, learning was easier. And I'll argue and pose this premise that it's because the educators did a lot of invisible work to make it so. And as a result, if you think about the popular image of the school children, now, I'll bet you can uncover a bunch of what makes for more effective education. So, I'd like you to enter in your thoughts on the following 3 broad areas of questions. So, this is the time to use that Q&A feature. 1, what activities would you expect the student to be performing while they're at school? 2, what activities would they be performing while they were at home that are different than at school? And then lastly, among all of those, what kind of materials does the student need in order to do the work? Now, of course, I'll have to turn to you, Shervin. What kind of answers are we getting?
I see, Daniel, we got some coming in now. We got listening. We got note-taking, taking notes, asking questions. The ones working with classmates.
Yep. And I'll circle back to that one. I do want you guys to hear that. Working with your classmates, socializing even, very important part of the educational process. What about for the at-home segment, Shervin?
Homework, doing homework, studying, reading.
Yep, definitely.
Reading textbooks.
Reviewing the materials that they had already worked through.
Let's see what people put. Paper, pens, laptop, pencils.
Oh, I hadn't thought of the laptop, but definitely.
And books.
There you go. Now, I want to go take a little bit more time to explore all of these answers, but y'all are hitting right on it. And exactly like I said, your image in your mind already leads you in the right direction. At school, we're expecting the students to engage with the materials by taking notes, by paying attention to the lecture from the teacher, by asking questions perhaps to clarify a point where they're uncertain as to the instruction. One thing I haven't heard a lot, though, is that they're going to be getting things like tests and quizzes as a form of feedback. They're going to get grades on what they've done and the demonstration of the knowledge they're taking in. And of course, they'll have that participation, maybe socializing with their friends or doing a hands-on lab, or even just talking about the material to one another in a study group. All of these little practices are things we'd expect from a student. And of course, when they're at home, we expect them to still engage with the material, though at a less intense level. Instead of being intensely focused for an hour on brand new content or on occasion on a review, we expect the home to be much more self-guided. They'll have some kind of practice which they're expected to do on their own. Some practice problems maybe in math or a writing prompt in English. And as they do their homework, they are interacting with material differently than they were when they were taking notes on it. And speaking of notes, we expect them to go back and review their notes while they're doing their homework so that they get this kind of immersion in the material, both through the doing out through one's hands, as well as the re-ingestion of the things that you highlight for yourself as you understood. Which, of course, leads us to all of the materials they're going to need. Exactly. We had textbooks. You need something to take notes on and something to take notes with. And then like the laptop for quick referential material, or maybe the textbook for the same reason. But I want to highlight one other thing which is available to the student in school. Not as easy to find. The instructor's lecture and their worksheets and even their presentation are generally most available while in school. It's very difficult for us to get those unless we happen to get a professor who kindly uploaded their lectures to YouTube to get that same material delivered to us. And it's this instructor's involvement in both kinds of feedback that we're going to do, the correct creation of the tests and homework, the lecture and the presentation thereof. All of this instructor work contributes to what I have described as the invisible structures that school provides. And they're why learning in school feels so much easier, because you have a whole bunch of highly paid, well, not highly paid, should be highly paid professionals thinking through the process of education for the success of their students. The instructors do a great deal of work just in organizing the content. What does it mean to teach someone biology? Well, they need to know about the cell. They need to know about organs. They need to know about organisms and evolution and all of these little things that all get melded up. What order do you present that in so that the student can understand? When we describe content influences a lot of what the student can absorb. I can't successfully describe, say, the full function of the organ and the interactions of the hormones without first diving a little into chemistry to explain how these pieces interact. But it's also the how. Not every subject is best learned through a lecture. Some of it is best getting your hands dirty. I don't particularly like titration, but it does do a good job in chemistry of demonstrating what this is all about. Deal with solutions. And so the way you teach interacts with the content, and not all content is created equally. So the last thing I want to highlight is that because not all content is created equally, one of the most important aspects of school that is not often talked about is that it provides a sense of progression. You believe that by the end of such and such a course, you will know and increment more knowledge. You will have learned biology or chemistry or English language composition as a result of taking the course. And to prove that you are making headway along this very massive, usually year-long commitment, we provide you tests and checkpoints, and milestones, and feedback on where we are in the program and where what you're doing right now fits in it. While we don't have access to the instructors, recognizing that they did a lot of work to enable the learning helps us do and understand a little more of this learning to learn piece. The instructors both organized and delivered content. So we're going to need to think of both how we're consuming the content, but also how we're organizing it as part of our job in constructing a system for ourselves to learn. And then lastly, the students had a lot of tools prepared in advance for them. They had the textbooks for absorption, both the notes, presentation from the lecturer, and the textbook itself for direct reference. They had stuff created for them for practice, like the worksheets or the homework. And then lastly, they had mechanisms for feedback by which they could track their own in the forms of tests and quizzes. So with this in mind, let's take that step moving towards observations and practical application. And I want you to answer the following questions for yourself. At what point do you know that you have learned something, a new skill, a new practice within our industry? And along with that, about how long do you expect that to take? My man Shervin, what have we got?
See, they're coming in. One person said a semester. We got 4 years of school. I'm assuming they mean college, university.
Yep.
Somebody put forever. I guess they're learning forever. They put forever.
Okay,
And
there's
then
some
another
truth in
person. And for the how I know I learned. I passed the exam, I graduated, and I used the skill today. So I guess I mean actual practical application of what they've taken on.
All of these are very true. Whoever said the forever learning, you're correct. For the broader sense that we should continually be leaning in to learn, that it should just become kind of a part of our daily repertoire. For the context of what we're talking about, let's consider single skills. How do I know when I learned a particular skill? And certainly there's an argument that true mastery of the skill takes longer. Okay, fair. Consider more of the going from not very skilled to kind of sort of then. And so we have those options like a full 4-year university and an engineering degree, or a 6-month boot camp, which does produce some skills in, say, software development. And all of these have different modes of both feedback and time investment. But I want to offer a couple of historical demonstrations which can be useful, because we talked a lot about the formal and the regimented over there on the right, where we have this four-year university and a prestigious certificate that says, yes, you have in fact completed. But I want to draw your attention to a couple of American presidents. There wasn't, at least not to the same degree, all of the formal education available, say, for example, offered to Abraham Lincoln. A lot of his start came from reading books on his own. And yes, he did eventually go to study, but he bootstrapped himself into it by using what he had and candlelight to cram the knowledge into his head and start using it. And so we have historical examples where men of moderate education, but significant will, educated themselves into good practices. Example being, for example, Ben Franklin. Abe Lincoln I already mentioned. And there are numerous of these if you want to go back and read some of the autobiographies. And I strongly encourage you to do that, because getting to look at the success of those in the past gives us a sense of hope that we can achieve similar in the future. So, some observations I'm taking from what we've had so far. Our main challenge, honestly, nowadays, isn't in finding material. You just need to exercise your Google Foo, and you could look up online course for topic. Or you could go look at Pluralsight for how do I X in JavaScript or React or any number of other technologies. And for the most part, if you're here, I can guarantee you your issue isn't finding the desire to learn. After all, you decided to spend any amount of your time either right now in this Lunch and Learn or later in a potential recording to go listen to me babble on about learning to learn. So you don't need to find the desire, you've got it. Our challenge is in constructing the feedback mechanisms so we feel like we're actually making progress and that the time we're spending matters. We need some help organizing the information so that we don't get overwhelmed, and that at each step, as we're able, we can pull in new information to do more. And of course, we have to overcome some negative internal narratives about how we're approaching this, because truth told, when you're self-guiding your learning, enemy number one is the little gremlin in here who's telling you you're not making progress. So, I want to offer one of the experiences I've had in life as a mental model for one of our practical applications. Martial arts has endured for generations. It doesn't have formal coursework. It doesn't really even have books you can study to learn the martial art, though there are certainly those that try and will show you the moves to go through. Truly understanding it benefits a lot from having the sensei in a similar way to the formalized education. But as a means of showing progression, instead of saying courses, there is a representation of the experience earned, the ability earned, through the representation in the belt, the black belt, the red belt, the white belt, where the white belt's first move, the first thing they learn is a white belt sparring stance. Ah! Because you want to run away. But as you progress to the initial able to hold your own in sparring at the green, and then to actually somewhat skilled in red, and to the black belt where you recognize half the time you just don't need to fight, there's a difference in the experience, but it's represented not just through the skill and confidence gained by the individual, but by a visual representation of the change on the outside. And oftentimes that's the thing we really want to be able to point to. I was able to do this. See, I earned X. Of course, as a means to create the ability to get there, because the belts take different times to learn. For a white belt, you might rank up in months, but to earn the difference between the first and the second degree black belt, it's going to take several years of study. So to facilitate this practice, they created a small repeatable mechanism called the kata. It's a sequence of moves performed in order, which when strung together form either a form or the education in a new move or a new discipline for the practitioner. So when we talk about practical applications, let's borrow that model to describe what we're going to build. I want you now take out some paper of your own and start thinking at a high level in belts for whatever it is you would like to learn. And let's kind of build ourselves a model of what it looks like to progress from the white belt all the way through to the black belt. And you can take the steps you need, but let's start with a vision of what does a black belt look like. Now, translation for example, the gentleman who said for forever, or lady, at that point, yes, forever, you're going to continue practicing mastery, but what does the next thing I would love to be able to do X look like? And be specific, and especially about why you want that. Do you want to be able to build a mobile app? Cool, why? because I'd like to show my friends that this neat little thing I learned how to do. Okay, cool. That sets what your level is. But if you want to be able to create the next big bang mobile app game, you're going to approach it very differently. So leave yourself some space, but I want you to think about these things. Think about your why, because that will change both how you approach the problem and what specific steps you take. And please, don't just aim at what you're pretty sure you could get. Take a couple steps beyond what I am confident I could do today or I could get there, and take a step into the discomfort. Here's why. As humans, when we set ourselves goals, life happens. And sometimes we don't get all of the time we need to get to said goal. Good goals are motivating, and they'll, even when we fall down, we'll get back up, we'll try at it again. So set a goal that is motivating through your why. Set a goal that's farther than you think you can get, because the further away, reasonably, it is from where you can, which is why we take 2 steps into the discomfort, not running off and abounding, the further it will pull you along. You will find you can get further than you expect yourself by setting the goal beyond what you're comfortable with, just a hair. So taking that sense of, here's what my next desired level of expertise looks like. Start with at the white belt, starting from where you're at. What's the first step of I could get there if I could learn to do blah. If I were talking about mobile app development, I might talk about, well, I need to figure out how to tie code I'm running on my machine to a simulator of an Android device. Or I could say, I just need to figure out how to render something as though it were in React Mobile. Okay. If we were talking about something a little more esoteric, say learning to play the drums, a good first step might be getting your own drums, getting a drum pad so you can practice tapping out rhythms in. And as we take that next step, think about that next step, maybe a green belt, not quite halfway, but a step beyond your white. What's different between I have developed a small amount of expertise to I'm starting to develop some more with this? Maybe that's actually packaging an APK that you could distribute to your phone for mobile development. And for drums, it might be actually playing to a song in your ears and not losing time through it. But make this a concrete, specific thing you can check off. Yes, I can do it. No, I cannot. Because otherwise you won't have the solid sense of progression which the belts are trying to provide. And you'll notice I've left a lot of gap between the specifics of the black belt, which is our next desired level of expertise, and the specifics of the white belt, which is about where our next step will be. And I've only planned one step beyond our next so that you don't get overwhelmed. There's a very careful balance that needs to be taken here of iteratively plan out a next couple of steps where you think you need to go, then reevaluate what you've achieved those to pick the next few as you build towards a goal at the end. You need the goal at the end and you need the steps right here, but the ones between right in front of you and the end, more optional and should be much more fluid as you're going through the practice. Speaking of practice, think about the kinds of things you're going to need in order to practice. I took up woodworking. In order to practice that, I'm of course going to need some raw lumber, or at least moderately treated lumber, so that I can cut it down to size and build whatever thing it is I want, which means I'm probably going to need some saws and probably some nails to hook things together. If I were to practice origami, however, I just need some paper. And I don't need to buy the fancy origami paper. I just need to borrow some printer paper. Maybe I can cut it down into little squares or something. If you're cooking, well, okay, that's going to need some food, whatever kind you're trying to prep, and probably some knives, some pans, some spoons. And, the trick, though, is to not get overwhelmed so much with the stuff you have to have, or even the stuff that's necessary for you to deliver at the mastery level you're aiming for. But where do you start? When I started practicing woodworking, I bought one circular saw. It cost me a bunch of money, but not as much as the wood I bought. And then I started practicing. And the simplest first little thing I made was 2 slats of woods with some slight edge or beveling cuts that slid together. Ta-da! And by the time I've been practicing this now for about 2 years, I just built myself a desk with almost no metal fasteners. And it's a matter of practice and time to build up to the layer that you're interested in delivering at. You don't need to buy the special fancy Japanese pull saw to start practicing today. You just need a saw. I could have made do with a handsaw. but I wanted to lower my barrier to entry, so I intelligently bought a little more of a tool, which made me more invested in the practice, but it helped me more likely to succeed. And so think of it like that. How much do I really need to get started, stripping it way back down to the minimum first start? And then think, how committed are you personally to learning to do this? For me, a $200 investment in a circular saw was worthwhile, and I caught it on a sale. So I acted. But you don't have to. And there's a lot of power in being able to choose the right moment when to grab on and when to say, I can wait. So from practice, that of course now gets us into this concept called the kata. What would a reasonable kata length look like? Because different things require different practice. So for example, starting with the drums, if I were trying to learn to practice a song, a reasonable kata might be the length of the song I'm practicing. Or it might be just 10 minutes with a metronome, trying to keep a steady rhythm for 60 seconds at a time. For woodworking, honestly, I found it took multiple hours to do one iteration of practice because that's how long it took for the project to go from started to completed, or even for me just to get in the practice of measuring stuff out and performing the cuts properly. That's okay. Origami might be a good sit down in 30 minutes. You just spend it folding, building the same little crane over and over again. But there are also practices like cooking, where you might be making bread, and it only takes about 30 minutes of actual focused labor throughout the day, but you'll be at it for 12 hours because you have to come back every 4 hours or so to do something, and then you bake it. Or you might be doing a fancy French dish, which is going to require you to stand at the stove for multiple hours as you reduce something. Keep in mind, what you practice is going to grandly affect what the effective kata, the effective unit of practice, is going to look like. And don't be afraid for the same skill that one kata going to take 5 minutes and another one's going to take all day. But be aware of it so you may talk and plan about which practice you will take on when. Because the all-day practice, probably not suitable for a beginner. That will exhaust them. That will probably not yield all the results they want. And it will get them into a layer of frustration. But a 5-minute kata where they can go do it, and it requires them to focus more than they're comfortable with now, but they'll get feedback like that, is very useful. It stretches them beyond their comfort zone, but it's not so long as to just devastate them. And so since you are thinking about creating the education systems for yourself, you know, I hope, a little of how you're going to feel spending 2 hours in a hot garage doing woodworking. Make adjustments. It's okay not to get all of the kata done in one sitting, but do try and make it so that the unit of feedback is very tightly known and intentionally chosen. The kata, further, should be a repeatable exercise, right? You'll be doing the same thing or intentionally doing specific actions again and again, sort of like your homework. When you did your multiplication tables, you had just a page of, say, 16 or 20 mathematical multiplication problems that you just had to work. But it is not the end product. By no means are we giving as homework the actual business case for I want to buy several thousand cases of such and such a product at one of two price points. How do I get as much as I can in $5,000? We don't send them that as the first problem. We start with simple, easy. It's not tied to a larger context. It is just perform this action. The kata is for practice, remember, right? It is a practice that I hope will be enjoyable, but it might not be. But in particular, you don't have to worry about doing it perfect. Our expectations of a student learning mathematics is not that all of their homework is perfect all the time. We expect them to be making progress. And we also expect, I hope, that they'll make some mistakes so that we can teach them. And that by practice, you become better. So do not look at the result of your practice and think, well, this simple little thing that just slides together is a complete waste. Sure, but don't judge by expertise when you just started. Don't compare yourself. You will only add to your misery. Learning is about finding ways to overcome that frustration, especially when we are teaching ourselves. That we need to get control of this little gremlin in the head that's saying, that's not very good, or that's not what I wanted. Those may be true, but you're not aiming at building what you want yet. You're practicing. And this shift helps you to now look at what you're doing with different eyes, to examine it in a way that is constructive to you learning to do better. And so as you find yourself talking about, oh, I wouldn't show this to anybody, just lean in and say, yeah, I certainly wouldn't. And that's okay, because it's not for showing anybody yet. When I'm ready to show somebody, I will have practiced this 1,000 times and it'll be good. And of course, as a result, if you're not going to show somebody, don't be afraid to toss it. There were plenty of trial wood projects that I have that either ended up as complete dross and got thrown into the burn pile, or just never saw the light of day. That's okay. A lot of times that's what practice is supposed to be. When you are in martial arts and you're practicing, I am not demonstrating in front of a crowd the thing I'm practicing. I might be trying to do that triple backflip and I just cannot land that third flip. I'm not going to be doing that for the first time in front of a crowd of 200. I'm going to wait and practice it until I'm confident, after having done it many times, that I'll land that third flip without spilling and falling flat on my face. So to make an effective kata, I'll offer you these questions. What do I hope to learn this session? Start with the end in mind. When you're creating a kata, even if it's just the next one, what are you trying to do? What are you practicing specifically? Are you practicing getting the right specific location when you're doing a 45-degree angle cut with your circular saw? Are you trying to make certain that during that strange syncopation section where they go into the bridge, that you don't lose your rhythm when you're practicing drums? Or are you trying to make certain that the mobile app actually compiles this time? All of these are valid things that you're trying to learn, though I would suggest the third, rephrase it. I want to successfully compile, or better, successfully debug why my mobile app did not compile as a result of this session. Okay, so that'll allow you to literally answer, what are you practicing? For woodworking, I am practicing getting a straight, proper 45-degree angle cut at the specific location I want the cut to end. For drums, I am practicing that segment so that I don't lose my place. And I'll know if I lost my place if by the time they exit the bridge, I'm not in time with them anymore. Okay, so how are you practicing that this session? For the drums, no one says you have to start at the beginning of the song every time you're practicing that syncopation in the bridge. So maybe, go to the minute 45 where the syncopation happens and start there. If you're practicing 45-degree angle cuts, why are you doing that on the wood of the project you're trying to make pretty and build? Why not grab a spare piece of plywood and practice a couple times? Because the how you practice should be motivated by the what it is you're trying to learn to do. And so specifically, you should be able to answer, what are you going to do different this time? That might be starting at a minute 30 and playing until 2 minutes 10 seconds to practice that segment in the drums. Or it might be, I'm going to take a dross piece of wood and just practice, and I will know I'm getting the right spot because I'm going to draw a line across the piece of the wood where I want the cut to stop. And then, of course, you should actually provide yourself a guess as to how you think the practice will change the results. Because you don't have a goal in mind and a way to test the goal, you're going to be very disappointed when you're like, I'm not really certain I did anything. If I were doing a martial arts practice, I would be practicing a specific kick 20 times. But the point is not to do it 20 times. The point is that my form for that kick improves, both in the beginning, the chambering, the kick, the retract, and the return, so that all of that can become one fluid motion without any noticeable hiccups as I move. That my goal is fluidity, not speed. Smooth is fast, and that's how you start. Sorry, slow is smooth, smooth is fast, is the way you build this up. Think in those terms. What do I expect this change to result in? So that I may verify, yes, that was a successful experiment, or I should tweak something else. And then, of course, don't forget to review afterwards. After you have created the kata and you have executed the kata, ask yourself, how did the changes work? Measure them against the thing you thought they would do at the beginning. Because if you can't do a before and after comparison and see a difference, or at least not a difference in the thing you were testing for, a new experiment is needed. But if you saw progress, yay, you have feedback. And it's the positive kind that you're making progress, which is really what we want to have. After that, ask yourself, what else might I try next time? What kind of things could I tweak? I could try, instead of doing it with the line, I want to see if I can do it by sight. Okay, that's a more advanced technique. Maybe that's not really what you need, though. It's that instead of doing the 45 cuts now, what I need is find a way to slice the edge rather than just do a full deep 45-inch cut. Okay, that's a different skill. And then from the things that you might do next time, might tweak, might ways to improve, select where do you need to practice next. If I'm trying to develop a skill and say it is in the drums, and I finally nailed that syncopation, maybe what I now need to do is practice in odd time signatures rather than just go back to that song and sure up a small segment where my left and rights get swapped. Might not be as important as it would be if I were trying to build to the skill. This is where that black belt piece comes in. Where am I aiming? What's the next logical step to get to where I'm aiming? If I need to stay where I am, great, go back and practice that again because that's what you needed to practice. And you'll have a new way to practice it, a little tweak to make. But if that's not where you're aiming, okay, cool. Now you get to take the next step. And so think both on what you could change and what you should go practice next. Those are the differences. So I'd like to take a moment here to offer some time for questions from you guys before I bring us around and summarize some of the pieces I'm hoping you're taking away. All right, Shervin, how are we doing?
Let's see. We have one here. I've already done / tried to do a lot of what you mentioned, but I still find myself unable to finish side projects. What do you suggest as ways to improve?
Okay. So when I've faced this challenge in the past of a side project just not getting done, what I have found for me has been that I didn't have a good way to articulate the why. So I'd start by backing up to, why are you doing a side project? Is it to learn, or is it to be able to show completed something? If it's the latter, that's okay, don't stop. But it should change the approach you take when learning. If you want to demonstrate a result, then what you are trying to do is perform, which is different than learn. So set aside the perform piece and maybe spin up a separate project to do your learning in. And take those steps in the kata to build up to the performance you want to be able to achieve. And where you're looking at the performance, that's your black belt. And then you can take steps back of, in order to do that, I need to be able to do this well, okay? Go practice that. What about what's next? Okay, I need to do this well with that new technique and where I want to aim, okay? Build it up. But breaking it down that way allows you to separate the I am learning and I need to throw it because I did it really poorly from the I want to perform by showing this result. Good question.
Okay, we got 2 more so far. When you get frustrated during learning, is it a good idea to pause? And if so, for how long?
Short answer, yes, it is a good idea to pause. The how long depends upon the kind of frustration you're looking at. I find that if I am midway through a woodworking kata and I'm destroying the wood, I will turn off the saw, take my hands off, and take a couple steps back from the workbench. Sometimes I'll even go so far as to cross them behind my back, and I will ask myself, what has you so frustrated right now? This is something I am borrowing admittedly from Stoicism, but asking yourself, what are you feeling, allows you to dissect the why of it. And usually what I'm feeling is I am feeling frustrated because this is not the level I think I ought to perform at. Okay, why? Oftentimes I'll make up some weird story about, well, I've been practicing such and such that should have allowed me to do that, which I will very calmly respond to, okay, is it doing that for you right now? No, okay. Is that because you're frustrated, because you're tired, or because you're doing it the wrong way? If I'm tired, answer is stop, go sleep, go do something. Oftentimes in woodworking, I get like a tremor because I'm out of water, quite literally. I've been sweating the whole time. So I'll stop, I'll go get some water, and I'll feel much better about 5 minutes later once I've had some good cool water and I've cooled off. If I'm looking at a tech project, I am pulling my hair out because I can't get it to compile after a couple of hours, it's time to stop. For me, oftentimes that's because I lost track of time and it'll be like 11:30 at night. I'm like, okay, I need to stop. I have to work tomorrow. But I will make an effort to set the time on my calendar no more than a week later to come back. If I wait too long, I'll forget what I was trying to do and what I was feeling that sent me away in the first place. Or worse, I'll leave my practice area in such a state that I don't want to go play there. So I'll encourage you, don't let too much time pass. Take your time to breathe. You know yourself best. Diagnose where the frustration is coming from. Address it where possible. And if that means that kata is something you just need to throw away, cool, toss it. And then come back with fresh eyes and a fresh set of ideas for how to practice and build it back up. But do not, as it were, get knocked off the horse and then not get back on. Just schedule time with yourself. I like these personal appointments. I'll usually set an hour or two or just a day that, hey, I'm going to go work on this project for an hour and a half in the evening after my kids are gone. And I'll communicate that with my wife so that she can help keep me honest. And by setting that time with myself ahead of time, I know I'm coming back to it and I don't get myself into this rut of I'm a failure. I instead say, no, I'm intentionally taking a moment to breathe and I'm going to come back at it and I'm going to beat it this time. That's a good question as well. What else do we have, Sherman?
Yeah, I got one more, Daniel. It says, how would I design a kata for something like writing a novel? So I'm assuming they mean something long-term and iterative.
Yeah. So I would go back to the suggestion, maybe that novel is not so much a kata as it is the black belt. Because if you want to start writing a novel and you haven't yet, we should start by doing simple things. How do you like creative writing? Do you do NaNoWriMo? What is it? The writing exercise in November where you write about 5,000 words? You could get involved in those things, but take it as if I don't know how to start on a big problem, put it out a couple of steps and talk about what's one unit forward. How are you at creative writing a paragraph where a simple character does something, and maybe you could borrow the Pixar way of constructing a story of, so-and-so did such. Every day they did something until one day when, and then and you build the story like that. But the practice elements come out from the structure that you're building around it. The kata fits inside of, I want to practice this small step. I want to practice a small step of, I want to get good at creative writing. A very effective kata might simply be set a piece of paper or a small notebook at your bedstand and a pen, and then every night before you go to bed, pick up the pen and write one sentence. And then close it and go to sleep. And build the habit, thank you, Atomic Habits, just of showing up, of putting pen to paper, putting your ideas out there. To build it until consistently, you're easily able to write full paragraphs and not even think about it. Congratulations, you built your mastery. And then as you get into more advanced topics for actually constructing these snippets, these scenes of creative writing into a coherent story, you'll need to talk about the bones, organizing those scenes to make a coherent hero's journey. At which point, one kata might be quick scripting out the bones of the story, the moments, those changes along the hero's journey for a creative exercise. If you've got existing stories, you could use those as inputs. But remember that different katas, different practices will have different inputs. The input to practice the organizational kata is not scenes. It is a theme or a story idea. The input to the editing kata for novel writing would be an individual scene, so that your editing takes in something you already have and makes it better. And this can be a way to build yourself up of, ooh, that was bad, let me fix that. Cool, but don't wear the writing, the editing, and the structuring hats at the same time. Do one thing, do it well, and build your practice from small steps. Get yourself showing up, get yourself building the basic flexed muscles. You'll be surprised how far you can run, how long. Any others, Shervin?
That's it so far, Daniel.
Fantastic. All right. So now, if you'll turn with me, let's go revisit that quote. Your first training has now been in how to learn. You had it in your school days. You had it from your mother and your father, and now you've come back to review the first lessons. And the first lesson of all has been the basic trust that you, in fact, can learn. You yourself have decided to watch this to this point and have demonstrated the desire to learn. That's the first piece. Now you've been given tools that will allow you to construct the lessons yourself. And remember, the lesson construction is a learned skill, so it'll take some time to practice, and that's okay. But as you use it, you'll get better. And of course, you'll find individuals who believe it's difficult to learn or believe that they can't. You now have tools and an ability to tell them, no, that's not true, you can. And you know that every experience, including a failed kata practice, which you're just going to throw away, has an experience that can teach you. And you've built the system that keeps you focused, keeps you moving in the direction you want to go, and gives you the feedback that you're getting there. So take this home. School did provide the scaffold to enable effective learning. And the same structures can help you. You've now gotten to see them. So anytime you forget, just think about what you expect the student to do in school. You can learn. It just takes practice. So pick a topic, pick something you would like to learn, make your plan, set up the belts. What's it look like for the next level of mastery you want to get? What's the step beyond where you are today? And what's the step beyond that? But don't spend the time building such an elaborate plan that you get done. 3 steps. My final destination, where I see it right now, the step I can take today, and the step I might take tomorrow. And then, of course, use that to measure your progress as you develop and practice with the katas. Make something that allows you to reflect on where you're at right now and what you just tried and evaluate it. Did it work? By setting up the expectations before you start, what you're hoping to see, and then checking, did I see that? And then, of course, iterate on that. Build better practices as you find that that didn't work, or that really, really did, and that it motivated you. Build more of those. Don't be afraid to say, yes, that works for me. And as you get there, you'll find more and more that your katas become easier to make. That more and more you don't need to think about them because you're running on your own and you know the next step almost intrinsically. Because after you've practiced teaching yourself, you will have effectively learned to learn. So thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you have found this presentation very effective, and I will now turn it over to Shervin for any closing remarks.
Thank you all for attending today's virtual lunch and learn. And Daniel, thank you for sharing Learning to Learn. The recording of the session will be available the next business day. To view the recording, locate the session from Improving's virtual events page. As a reminder, all of our virtual lunch and learns are recorded and shared for your convenience. Thank you. Have a safe, enjoyable weekend, and remember to be kind to each other.